so I wanted to record this. I thought it was very interesting. And it says here Abraham Lincoln or Linkhorn. It says this is an argument read by L.P. Henninghausen at the yearly meeting of the society in 1901. Says it was it a blunder of the clerk in the land office of Richmond, Virginia in 1780 when he issued the land warrant to the grandfather of Abraham Lincoln by the name of Abraham Linkhorn, as alleged by his biographers. All right, so what this person is talking about is that Abraham's grandfather is referred to in documents, in old documents, as not Lincoln with the C-O-L-N, but Linkhorn, as you see here. And they said, they wrote it off in history saying, well, that was blunders by the clerics and all these people who didn't know how to spell or whatever. And so he's going to show you something in this article, though. It says, the only historical information we have of the ancestry of Abraham Lincoln is his own saying that his ancestors originally came from Berks County, Pennsylvania, all right, and moved from there to Rockingham County, Virginia. That his grandfather Abraham, about 1780, with his wife and children, left Rockingham County to establish himself in Jefferson County on a farm about 20 miles east of the present city of Louisville. This grandfather was a man of some means, for we find that before he left for Jefferson County, he obtained from the land office of the Commonwealth of Virginia in payment of the sum of 160 pounds current money, the land office treasury warrant number 334, bearing the date the 4th day of March 1780, and directed to the principal surveyor of any county within the Commonwealth of Virginia to survey and lay off in one or more surveys for Abraham Linkhorn, his heirs, and assigns the quantity of 400 acres of land due to said Linkhorn. All right, so he's saying there's a document from 1780 that says he named himself Linkhorn. Here is the document. It says, I here offer a facsimile of said land warrant to the principal surveyor of any county within. So it says here, this shall be your warrants, survey, and lay off and more. And it says Abraham Linkhorn. You see his signature? Kentucky was at that time a part of Virginia, still inhabited by Indians, who resisted the white invader by every craft of cruel warfare known to them. The reports of the wonderfully fertile soil and salubrious climate of the territory brought home by adventurous hunters from the western frontier settlements of North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland were the cause of the immigration of many from these parts of the county to Kentucky. So your ancestors here, you know, making sure they're fighting, they're trying to keep their land. Western Maryland, West Virginia, and Western North Carolina are reported to be the first and principally settled by Germans from Berks, Lancaster, Bucks, and other counties of Pennsylvania. So now listen to this. So remember, he's saying that their family came from that place in Virginia, who had actually been there from Pennsylvania, right, in the Berks, and these were Germans. All right, Germans, Linkhorn. Abraham Linkhorn must have taken his time to select his future homestead, for it was 5 years later, on May 7th, 1785, that he received his certificate of the survey of 400 acres of land in Jefferson County by virtue of said treasury warrant number 334 on the Fork of Floyd's Fork. All right, so blah, blah, blah. And so here's the written letter. It says, you will see from this that the name Abraham Linkhorn appears in the body of the warrant, and it is also signed by him, Linkhorn, whilst two officials who had to affix their signatures to the warrant named Ananiah Lincoln and Joshua Lincoln signed as such and not as Linkhorn. In the next year, 1786, this Abraham Linkhorn was killed by the Indians. His son Thomas, all right, this is Abraham Lincoln's dad, Thomas, the father of President Lincoln, was then only 7 years of age. He was allowed to grow up without any schooling. He was allowed to grow up with no schooling. Remember, he was an escaped runaway indentured servant to his dad. So he grew up without schooling. Well, that would make sense if he's an indentured servant. He never learned to write. And we are not informed whether he could read. He was known as Lincoln. He was known as Lincoln. So maybe his dad, since he didn't know how to write or read, he was writing it wrong. So during the lifetime of President Lincoln, no one ever appeared to claim or was recognized by him as a relative on his father's side of his ancestors. All right, so we're going to get into how mysterious, and they don't really know. It's hard for them to really trace his genealogy. It's like a mystery. So It is only since the death of the great man that the attempt is made to connect him with a certain Mordecai Lincoln, gentleman of Massachusetts, who removed to Monmouth, New Jersey. So you see, they try to link him to a wealthy noble guy, right? Where he is said to have died in 1735. Whenever President Lincoln was asked about the genealogy of his family, he loved to quote the line from Gray's Elegy on a Country Churchyard: "You must look into the short and simple annals of the poor." So he himself is saying he's poor. Continuing on here, it says the laborious efforts of the biographers of the president to make him a descendant of a rich gentleman from New England who died only 73 years before Lincoln was born, and the absurd assertion that the name and signature of his grandfather was by an ignorant or mischievous clerk, changed from the well-known historic English Lincoln to the German-sounding Linkhorn, especially when two attestant officials named Lincoln also affixed their signatures, belongs to nursery tales and not to historical researches. So he's saying that in this same letter, he signed Linkhorn, and there's actually people who signed Lincoln the correct way. So why would the clerk sign it wrong, right? They know what they're spelling is what he's saying. The fact that the warrant and certificate are the only new muniments of title to the 400-acre homestead of Abraham Linkhorn is conclusive, and this is the only existing title of his grandfather. And they're saying it's a mistake, without the clearest proof to the contrary that Linkhorn, and not the more familiar and common Lincoln, the name of an old English city and county, was the family name of the grandfather of the president, and was changed like an untold number of German names by and during the life of his illiterate son Thomas. It says Lincoln said his ancestors came from Berks County, Pennsylvania, and emigrated from there to Rockingham County, Virginia. Now listen to this. It says we know that the Berks County was settled by Germans at the end of the 17th and first decades of the 18th century, and the German language is to this day the common vernacular of the people of the county. Further, we know that in the third decade of the 18th century, an emigration set out from Berks and adjoining counties to Rockingham County, Virginia, and that many of these German immigrants were German Quakers or non-combatants, Mennonites. All right, and these were mostly indentured servants. All right, I'm going to show you this. I've mentioned it before. I know you remember in my past video. But these are all indentured servants arriving in Pennsylvania and emigrating to Virginia. This is documented. This is historical migrations, U.S. American historical migrations of these people. Lincoln stated his ancestors were Quakers. From the church records and schoolhouses erected by these new settlers in Virginia, as well as from many family Bibles, hymns, books, certificates, letters, etc., still preserved, we know that they were not illiterate, and if Abraham Linkhorn was one of them, he could write his name, and neither the land office in Richmond nor the surveyors in their certificate are guilty of clerical errors. So real quick, just to correlate, it says here, exploring diversity in Pennsylvania history. The German settlement in Pennsylvania, this is from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania with the Balch Institute for Ethnic Studies. It says in 1683, a group of Quakers and Mennonites from the Krefeld region of the Rhineland founded the city of Germantown, the first recorded German settlement in the English colonies. Mennonites were religious dissenters who believed in adult baptism and absolute pacifism. William Penn had proselytized among Rhine Valley dissenters and invited them to settle in his colony. All right, we know historically William Penn did do that, and he did it through the indenture system, headright system. That's how he did it. We got this already. By 1710, German immigration to Pennsylvania increased significantly. German immigrants founded Skippack in 1702 and Ole and Conestoga in 1709. Most early German immigrants came from the southwest region of Germany, the area known as the Rhineland, Palatinate, Württemberg, Baden, and German Switzerland. Study those regions. Do you find Moors in those regions? I bet you will in history. Between 1727 and 1775, approximately 65,000 Germans landed in Philadelphia and settled in the region, while some German immigrants landed in other ports and moved to Pennsylvania. The largest wave of German immigration to Pennsylvania occurred during the years 1749-1754, but tapered off during the French and Indian Wars and after the American Revolution. The wars in the colonies in Europe, combined with the rise in land prices, made it difficult to attract German immigrants, especially those with families. There were many reasons why Germans left their homeland to make the treacherous journey across the Atlantic to America. Although much has been said about religious persecution, dissenters comprised a minority of German immigrants to Pennsylvania. You hear that? That was the minority. Dissenters were not the majority. You see, this is very important. I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to say. So during our history, when they was teaching us about these immigrants, they never wanted to teach us that they were indentured servants or like slaves, that they went through a middle passage and were treated like chattel property. So they would use this whole religious dissenters, religious persecutions, and all this. They were seeking religious freedom, made them look like victims, and that they were actually on their own coming over here, and happily. But in reality, as is letting us know here, dissenters or these kind of people who were religiously persecuted were a minority that were immigrating to Pennsylvania. Most were affiliated with Lutheran and Reformed churches, conservative religious groups. They left primarily because of the devastation of the 30-Year War and the subsequent wars between the German principalities and France. For these immigrants, the colony of Pennsylvania must have seemed like a land of opportunity, despite accounts written by travelers such as Gottlieb Mittelberger, who warned his fellow countrymen of the dangers they would encounter. We got a book of him already. Instead, most chose to believe letters from relatives such as Christopher Saar, who wrote of the generous land grants and political and religious freedom in the colony of Pennsylvania. It says German immigrants tended to come in family units and were often tradesmen or artisans. One historian described the typical German immigrant as a poor farmer or artisan who arrived around 1750 with a wife and 2 children. They were most likely in debt for passage across the Atlantic, but had family or friends already settled in America. They were affiliated with the Lutheran or Reformed Church, but only loosely committed to an organized religion. Records indicate that they became prosperous members of the community. However, many were too poor to pay for the what? For the transatlantic passage. We're talking about the German transatlantic slave trade. Yes, not the African slave trade, transatlantic. We're talking about the German transatlantic slave trade. So as many as 1/2 of 2/3 of German immigrants came to Pennsylvania as what? Indentured servants. Again, the German transatlantic slave trade. Indentured servants or redemptioneers, as Germans called them. Immigrants would pay back the ship owner for their passage and expenses by contracting their services to an employer for a set number of years, usually between 2 to 7 years, when their term of service was completed. Their indebtedness was redeemed. Conditions varied for indentured servants, and families could be separated for years. By the time of the Revolutionary War, there were approximately 65,000 to 75,000 ethnically German residents in Pennsylvania. We're talking about, you see that? Now, were all these people white Germans? That's the hijack you got to dodge. We can't go and generalize. We got to go case by case, individual. A lot of these were so-called black Germans, Swarthy, Swarts.
Again, the book that we've gone over before, it's The Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind and Peopling of Countries by Benjamin Franklin. And this one says 1755, right? And just want to remind everybody, what has been said, before and, by who. So I want to read from here. It says, why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion? All right, so Benjamin Franklin is saying, they're not even our complexion, right? So he's talking about Germans, but I thought they were all white. I thought he was white. I thought Germans was white. What is he talking about? So I know we've read this before and we know what he means. So yeah, he's letting us know straight up that Germans are not the same complexion as what he is in his time. Which leads me to add one remark. He says that the number of purely white people in the world, all right, is proportionally very small. All Africa is black or tawny. Asia is chiefly tawny. All right, so again, all Africa is black or tawny. Asia, chiefly tawny. America, exclusive of the newcomers, so America instead of the new people, other than the new people, it's wholly so. Wholly what? Black or tawny. Wholly black or tawny America. And in Europe, the Spaniards, the Italians, the French, the Russians, and the Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also. the Saxons only accepted who, with the English, make the principal body of the white people on the face of the earth. He's saying, why are we bringing all these swarthy Europeans, over here?
A little bit of history of Abraham Lincoln and his, genealogy supposedly. This is I got it from the Library of Congress. It says here Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States of America, an American lawyer, was born in part of Hardin County, Kentucky, which is now included in LaRue County, February 12th, 1809. His ancestors, who were Quakers, all right. So remember, he said he was dark complexion and that he was a slave and a servant, indentured servant. So his ancestors were Quakers from Berks County, Pennsylvania, who went to Rockingham County, Virginia. And from there, his grandfather, Abraham, removed with his family to Kentucky about 1782 and was killed by Indians in 1784. So his grandfather was killed by Indians. Thomas Lincoln, so that's his dad, Thomas Lincoln, right, who indentured him, right? The father of Abraham was born in Virginia and in 1806 married Nancy Hanks, also a Virginian. So that was his mom, Nancy Hanks, as they say. In 1816, he removed with his family to what is now Spencer County, Indiana, where Abraham, being large for his age, very large, he was very tall, they say, was put to work. He was put to work right away, right? Remember, with an axe to assist in clearing away the forest, and for the next 10 years was mostly occupied in hard labor on his father's farm. All right, hard labor. They ain't saying why. He was an indentured servant for that. In this book, it says Abraham Lincoln and His Ancestors by Ida Minerva Tarbell. And it says here, in the footsteps of the Lincolns, it says the story of Abraham Lincoln begins in Hingham, Massachusetts, it says, supposedly, in the year 1637. We're going to see a different story, though, when the first of his family line came to the Puritan colony of Boston Bay. This was his great-great-great-great-grandfather, Samuel, by the name of a boy, but 17 or 18 of that time. Such a boy as we would send to high school or college in these days. Young as Samuel Lincoln was, he was not without some experience of life. He had sat on Spackle's bench in 17th century schoolroom in Hingham, England, and received his share of its narrow but thorough teaching. And because he was to earn his living, and weaving was the natural trade for a boy in Norfolk County, England, at that time he had been apprenticed. I remember, apprentice and indenture. This was the normal in England. They did that to all the children. So he was used to being an apprentice or indentured. This was his family was coming from this. If this is his great-great-great-grandfather, right? To a man by the name of Francis Laws, living in Norwich, not many miles from Hingham. It says, when you were apprentice in those days, you left your family and became a member of your master's family. You had, big, very important there. This is what I was saying earlier. It says, when you were apprentice in those days, you left your family and you became member of your master's family. So is this what happened to Benjamin Franklin? Was that really his dad pimping him and selling him out? But this is very important. They're telling you right here, when you were apprentice in those days, you left your family and became a member of your master's family. You had more to do than to learn to weave. In fact, you was what was called an indentured servant. All right, you're an indentured servant. Apprentice, same thing. Indentured servant. They try to make it sound nice when they say apprenticed. All right, but it's indentured servant. Mr. Laws was under contract to teach Samuel the trade and to give him his keep in small, probably a very small weekly or monthly sum. Samuel in turn was obliged to obey Mr. Laws, and that meant not only that he must learn to weave, but he must wait on the family. If the family was ungenerous and domineering, it is easy to see that the apprentices had a bad time. Indeed, they had so bad of a time that only a few years after Samuel left England, there was what was called the Apprentices' Revolt. Strike, we should probably say today. It produced the state of things which led Daniel Defoe to complain. All right, so they're saying these apprentices, these indentured servants who had a revolt. All right, so again, this ancestor of Abraham Lincoln in England was already an indentured servant. There, he's coming from a line of servants. Again, just to correlate, I'm in this book, The Ancestry of Abraham Lincoln by Henry Lee and J.R. Hutchinson. And we're in chapter 1, The Ancestry of Abraham Lincoln. Chapter 1, The Immigrant, His Home and Parentage. It says, among those who in the later 30s of the 17th century were overtaken by the swiftly rising tide of immigration was a Norfolk youth named Samuel Lincoln. Born in Hingham, he had been early apprenticed to one Francis Laws of Norwich, and it was in his capacity of indentured servant to this man, he was a servant, a weaver by trade, that he embarked for America. together with his master and his master's family, either at the port of Ipswich in the adjoining county of the Suffolk or at Yarmouth in his native county. On the 8th day of April 1637, the passage was no Mauritanian one. For 2 months and 12 days, the vessel breasted the Atlantic, and it was not until the 20th of June that Laws and his party disembarked at Boston, first set foot on the soil of their adoption. Our boy pioneer was then how old? In his ancestry, if it is his ancestor, Samuel Lincoln, he was an indentured servant. So you see a line of indentured servants already.
Right.
I wanted to get recorded.